Hello, my name is Katie Gow, and I'm going to be going over the Supreme Court case of Plessy versus Ferguson decision. So, just briefly kind of trying to summarize up the case and go over it. The case of Plessy versus Ferguson was a case overgoing the situation that had happened to Plessy, who was a Louisiana resident who happened to violate the Separate Car Act. The Separate Car Act required railroad companies to provide separate but equal accommodations for white and black passengers. That means there's a section for white people to sit and there's a section for black people to sit. So Plessy ended up sitting in an all-white seat and was forcibly removed by the police. For the verdict of Plessy versus Ferguson was ruled 7-1. So, yeah, he did not win that case. Against Plessy, meaning that racial segregation was constitutional as long as businesses were depicted as separate but equal. We see this in the below quote from the Supreme Court Plessy versus Ferguson decision source provided. We consider the underlying fallacy of the plaintiff's argument to consist in the assumption that the enforced separation of the two races stamped the colored race with a badge of inferiority. If this be so, it is not by reason or anything found in the act, because the colored race chooses to put that construction. Now, for the bigger picture. The Plessy verdict highlighted how racial segregation was legalized across the United States. This affected the way black people received educations, rights, job opportunities, literacy opportunities, a whole bunch of other things compared to white people. And just continuing on that, in my secondary source going over the case, the article states that the administrative state is capable of creating divergent legal frameworks that powerfully shape public life, meaning the court system had every way to turn this case and make a better decision, but it chose racism over what's right. So, what is the relevance now since this happened a very, very long time ago in 1954, around that time? And the Plessy verdict was eventually thankfully overturned way before, this happened way before 1954. But the Plessy verdict was eventually overturned in 1954, thankfully, by Brown versus Board of Education. Their ruling was that separate educational facilities are extremely unfair and just unequal. Harlan's statement is of true constitutional equality, especially where he says, in respect of civil rights, all citizens are equal before the law. The humblest is the peer of the most powerful. My secondary source was an article called Plessy Preserved Agencies and the Effective Constitution by Joe Milligan. Their journal goes over the societal impacts of the case and how the law system failed Black people as a whole in this case, and further the way for mistreatment for years to come. That's extremely, extremely important. It shows how the Supreme Court upheld systematic racism at one point in time. And these are my sources. I used the source provided and I found my secondary source, which is a scholarly article. And then in the chapter 5 in the textbook, it goes over the case in more detail and pretty much just summarizing what had happened. So I think this case is also extremely important. It shows how not only were Black people mistreated and it was known that it was not right, but it was also upheld in court and it was also prioritized. So I think that is extremely scary. That is something that resonated with me, for it to be held up in court, 7-1 ruling. And yeah, that's pretty much my summarization of the case.